Welcome everyone to the PYRESWAP show for Market Monday. Market Monday, the most high effort macroeconomic content you see here in the world of Web3. And by the way, today we are streaming for the first time in parallel on both the PYRESWAP and the PYRESWAP TR Twitter accounts. Same time, simultaneously. We're double fisting Twitter right now. Do you guys understand? Yeah. So we're generally gonna get. I asked Whisper to help me out with the caption to make the caption Turkish at least. But I want you guys to understand something. It's okay if we stream English content to the Turkish channel because they have the ability, like individually, to go and translate it later. The AI that would dub it in real time is extremely expensive. I'm not sure if it makes sense for us to make that investment while we only have like 100 total followers on that account. But remember why the reason we started the Turkish account in the first place is that a native English speaker would discount content they see in a foreign language. But somebody who speaks a foreign language, arguably, by the way, Turkish in this concept, they're not going to discount content they find in English. Does that make sense? Because English happens to be the global economy language. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? So we're going to stream in English to the PYRESWAP TR account just for the sake of putting more content on that Twitter account. Does that make sense? And I think the fact that we're streaming to it shows that it's an official account. Does that make sense to everybody? All right, fantastic. So today we got a bunch of great content for you guys, and for anybody following on Twitter or Twitch or Kick or what have you, welcome as well. And we might add a few more platforms as well to our ability to do this. We might have more in parallel streams, and arguably, this platform Restream comes with seats, and I think I could also, if we're succeeding at streaming to both Twitter accounts right now, which by the way, can you guys check? Yeah, who here can check for me? Like, are we successfully streaming to both Twitter accounts? Because if that's the case, I should also be streaming to my personal account, right? Do you guys get what I'm saying? If I can stream to 0x5, right? Like, I feel like that would be the way to go then, right? If you guys can check, if you guys are on Twitter and can check this, that would be really appreciated. But here is the, I guess, the big announcement as far as PYRESWAP goes. We have changed Summoning Circle. So Summoning Circle has gone from 50% to 25% on all three chains. Do you guys, oh, they're both, okay, awesome. So literally we are streaming to multiple Twitter accounts at the same time. Amazing. Okay, that's amazing. Yeah, that's fantastic. If that's the case, I should also stream to my personal probably as well. I'll figure out how to do that. I might need to buy more things with Restream, but we'll figure that out. Okay, I think we already have that disabled. Does that make sense? Okay. My producer is talking to me about actually implementing that. Okay, so Summoning Circle is from 50% to 25%. Now what this means, by the way, is of the swap fees that get collected, it's kind of like a half-life. Does that make sense? It's like do you guys know what a half-life is? First of all, let's start with that. Who here knows what the word half-life means? Okay, so Jabri, you being the brilliant engineer that you are, we used to have it that half of the fees that were collected, we would always take half of that and bring it and send it to the incantation witch vault. Does that make sense? So whatever the swap fees were, we were basically leaving that in liquidity, and then whatever happened is we were just cutting the amount that was left in half. Does that make sense? So therefore, there would always be a reserve of fees that was waiting there to be cut in half for next epoch. Does that make sense to you guys? This is one of the ways. Thank you so much for that Half-Life reference. Yeah, Half-Life by Valve. Yes, Half-Life 3 confirmed, by the way. But we have now reduced it to 25%. Now, in theory, I'm gonna change my color up here. Hang on. This does taper deflation. Does that make sense? It does. It does. It tapers deflation. Yep. But we're going to find out and see if it actually makes us, if it actually breaks the uptrend or not. Does that make sense? So right now, you might see the uptrend get slightly a little bit flatter. You might see it. You might not see it. Does that make sense? Like, I really don't know if you're going to see a measurable impact on the trend. However, by the way, guys, we have these markers coming that literally have a centimeter by centimeter chisel tip. It's like the most legible dry erase marker you've ever seen in your life. Does that make sense? It's literally going to be like, yeah, the chisel tip is like the size of my fucking pinky finger here. And yeah, it's going to be so legible that you're going to be able to literally walk away from your phone and read it from across the room. That's how legible it's going to be. Anyways, if this does kick us out, of uptrend, we're not going to continue toggling summoning circle, because the fact of the matter is why did we do this? Who here knows why we did this? Yes, the transpiration, the epoch transpiration things continue to hang up. And the reason they hang up is because liquidity is low, TVL is low, volume is low. Therefore, if we're taking a smaller amount, we have a larger reserve. Does that make sense? So in theory, this should make it so that the transpiration of epochs happens smoother. Now, they are all caught up on all chains right now. Did you guys see that? All three chains are now caught up. Are you guys bearing witness to this? Yep. Yeah. So that got done, and it's now at 25%. If this does kick us out of deflationary uptrend, we're not gonna bring summoning circle back up to 35%, nothing like that. Okay. Rather, what we will do is we will go from 0.7% expansion down to like 0.5%. Does that make sense? Or lower. Does that make sense? So like literally, like if we're just trying to get like a net trend. Does that make sense? So if we have to, because this in fact tapers deflation, if we don't like where the trend goes, we will in fact reduce inflation to get us back to a deflationary uptrend. Does that make sense to everybody involved? Does it? Okay. And again, Javery, you might have a grasp on this that the average person doesn't, but I want to make sure that everybody understands the way I think, so they don't feel like they don't accuse me of blindsiding them. I don't know if I know of a project where you get this level of transparency into like the executive decision making about this stuff that the investors and the user base actually care about, right? Yeah. Speaking of which, okay. By the way, this is Market Monday, so we're going to talk about the markets here heavily. We're going to talk about the markets. Thank you, Jerry. We're going to talk about the markets heavily here in a minute. But what I'll also talk about first is, first of all, we have 37 members in our subreddit. Let's fucking go. Yeah. r/PYRESWAP. You guys, that's like 75% of the way there. You guys, bravo. 37 members in our fucking subreddit. Could the subreddit membership be, yeah, who knows, Fire Producer, how many are else? But could the membership be going up because of our Reddit awareness campaign and people are just searching for it? Who knows? Who knows? But yeah, we have gained members. I don't know where, but we've gained them. Anyways, so okay, so summoning circle has been changed. Okay, this is another large change. Possible cancellations of the PYRESWAP show on Friday and Sunday. Okay? Now I'm going to explain why we're talking about this and why would we cancel the PYRESWAP show. Okay, so I'm going to tell you guys a secret about me. I'm not like an extrovert. I'm not actually, like, even though I really do enjoy doing these streams, and I enjoy, I guess, talking about the stuff that, you know, is, it's not that, CJ, no. Rather, so we're trying to variegate the amount of content that we do for our awareness campaign. Does that make sense? For those of you who know, our awareness campaign involves Reddit, but it also involves things like short form content like TikTok, Instagram Reels, and YouTube Shorts. Does that make sense, everybody? Yeah, exactly. So I would like, when I do this show, I want to bring my A game. Does that make sense? Like, I am always trying to like knock this show out of the park. Yeah, Jabri, that's exactly it. So I would say that I'm like a natural introvert, but a synthetic extrovert. The fact of the matter is that the social energy drain of doing these things is palpable to me. Even doing things like writing an announcement, I was explaining this yesterday. When you write an announcement into a Discord server, which is going to get transmitted everywhere, in order for this announcement to be effective, you have to bring yourself into the state of energy that you want to convey into the reader. Does that make sense? Bring yourself into the state of energy you want to convey to the reader first, then write the actual words. Does that make sense? Because then when they read those words, they will then feel how you felt. Does that make sense? Because you can convey the same message at two different levels of energy. Maddie, you're correct. Well, we're still gonna do more than one a week. But like that amount of energy is still like, to write an announcement, not only does it take like, a solid chunk of time, but then also it's like actual social energy that I have to effectively go to sleep to recover. So the fact of the matter is, we were doing man on the street content last night. We were doing it yesterday. And we did about 3 interviews in about an hour, which is not a terrible turnaround. But the fact of the matter is, I don't want to bring my B game to man on the street. Do you guys understand what I'm saying? Like, I want my A game level of energy to be there for our ability to do those types of content. So since it is likely that Friday and Sunday, and possibly Saturday, but probably not Saturday, Friday and Sunday are the most likely days that we will do man on the street. Therefore, I'm going to probably cancel. Yeah, exactly. So I probably as of today, I'll officialize this an announcement later, and I'll make the summoning circle announcement in there as well. I'll probably cancel Friday and Sunday. We'll still do it Monday through Thursday. And the fact of the matter is, that is there so that I can bring my A game onto the actual street. So that way I can have social energy talking to strangers in public. Because if I do the PYRESWAP show and then I do like another meeting or so, and then we do like training or something like that, or then I have other calls and meetings, by the time it's time to do man on the street content, like, I'm just bringing my B game, I feel. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like I need to be, like, ready to go for man on the street content. Because, by the way, the man on the street content is the stuff that I'm the most junior at. Does that make sense? Like, that's the type of content that I'm the most amateur at. So I feel like I need to make it a focus of, like, really doing a good job on it. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Because I want, the same energy that I have in that content is going to be what conveys the virality of those images. So the fact of the matter is I'm going to take my own time, and we're just going to cancel the Sundays and Fridays because I need to help the awareness campaign of TikTok and Reels and YouTube Shorts. Does that make sense? Of doing man on the street content. And by the way, this is also, like, the PYRESWAP show is also chopped up into shorts as well. But I think us having a variety of content for shorts helps the channel. Does that make sense to you guys? Do you guys get it? All right. And Pega, by the way, Pega is doing a great job at being the content captain of our Reddit campaign. We're continuing to get better and better at it. The only thing to do there is really just to scale it. Yeah, Maddie, 100%. Maddie, 100%. And in fact, I would love to be able to take a vacation, and I might take another vacation when we hit the TWAP threshold, a Phantom release, something like that. That might be within 30 days. Who knows? And literally just to, just so I have the ability to keep coming up with the energy to do this, because this is like my whole life. Yeah, I don't really do anything besides this, and we're not gonna fail to hit this target. So like, if that costs me my health, it will. Like that's just part of what's willing to be sacrificed. But at the same time, if I actually destroy myself, it's not good for the project. Does that make sense? So this is another type of balance. Yeah, Jackson Hole's a nice place. Speaking of which, there is a Fed Open Market Conference this week, and Jerome Powell will be making a a press conference on Wednesday. That's this week, by the way, Market Mondays. Anyways, so cancellations of that, deflationary uptrend. Let me see. I'm going to talk one more thing. I'm going to tell you guys one more thing. We calculated the FOMC. The airdrop, the Genesis V1 airdrop. By the way, this is only calculated for Phantom. I apologize that it wasn't calculated for all three, but it is only this much. It is 635,000 Pyre Phantom. Does that make sense? When airdrop indeed. Thank you, Mr. Good Project. And yeah, thank you, Mr. Good Project. Jabri, yes, because it will be the first time. It'll be the first possible rate cut. So yeah, by the way, Wednesday's FOMC is kind of significant because it kind of, yeah, it's a rate cut. Speaking of which, I'm going to talk about that in a second. I'm going to talk about all the markets in a second. Okay, can you guys guess what the gas required is to airdrop this? Who here can take a guess? In phantom quantity. Anybody else? Six, 10, 1, 2.1, 0.6. Anybody else? $0.003. Maddie has now guessed twice, so I'm just going to ignore him. Anyways, the estimated gas for to airdrop 635,000 is 1.25 phantom. Isn't that great? Look at that, you guys. Yeah. Literally, this is how much gas it will cost to airdrop this much. Yeah. We don't know the BNB and AVAX yet, but arguably, if it's any sort of a balancing act, it's the fact that the Avalanche and BNB side, that since they were arguably less popular, even if their gas prices are more, it'll still be like less total people. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Like, the fact of the matter is, it's the quantity of wallets here that drives the gas price up. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Yeah, Pega was the closest. Or sorry, Pyre Producer has now edited his post. Yeah, Pega was the closest. Okay, yeah. A round of applause for Pega and Pyre Producer. Everybody clap. Let's do some clapping emojis in the chat, you guys. Clapping emojis. I'm just going to keep clapping until you guys post some clapping emojis. Okay, thanks, CJ. Holding down the fort like always. Yep. Bravo. Okay, so are you guys ready to get into the old markets? The old markets for Market Monday? Thank you, Trigger. Okay, so first of all, FOMC press conference Wednesday. There you go. Jay Powell. Wednesday. This is likely, okay, this is possibly a rate cut, meaning a dovish direction. Do you guys know what rate cuts means? It means borrowing becomes more affordable. Generally speaking, yes, borrowing becomes more affordable. I'm actually going to talk about the three powers of the Fed today as well. But anyways, do you guys know what the ECB did? The Euro Central Bank. This is the Euro. Yep. The Euro cut rate. Yeah. So the Euro cut rate, this is the second rate cut this year. The Euro is now, they went from 3.75% to 3.5. Now, I want you guys to know that these interest rates and the way that the rates are described for certain banks, like they're not exactly fungible with each other. For instance, did you guys know that the Russia Central Bank went from, I think it was like 18 to 19% hike. But the Russia Central Bank uses something called a key rate, which is not the same thing as necessarily, like, it still applies it still applies to the rate of like borrowing and lending, but the way that they're configured is different. Does that make sense? Make sense? Yeah, so Russia has hiked, and somebody said Japan is going to hike. Well, you know, my buddy bought the yen at the dip. Yeah, he bought the yen on the dip. Yeah. Right, he just, for whatever reason, he's like, this is the all-time low or whatever, and then he bought then, and then it's like up, I don't know, 20% or something, 15%, 12%, something like that, in 2 months. I don't know. That's the type of trade he likes, but yeah. Oh yeah, and Jaybri, he also like bought it in cash. Like he didn't fucking do a Forex trade. He went to a bank where they sold foreign exchange and literally like bricked over US dollars and then literally got a brick of fucking yen. Yeah, well, you know, that's different people have different appetites for how much they want to trade digitally. I have weird friends, let's put it that way. Okay? Yeah. 18 to 19%. And of course, Russia is hiking its rate because of war. Does that make sense? Like inflation. Inflation is also a thing when countries go to war because they end up spending a lot of money on things that don't really generate like value. Does that make sense? Yeah, exactly. Okay, so let's see. We got the ECB did a rate cut. The JPOW conference on Wednesday. Russia has hiked its key rate. So first of all, those are the major things to talk about. So this Wednesday, whether Jerome Powell hikes the rate or not cuts the rate or not, is probably like the biggest thing happening. The ECB has already cut its rate for the second time. Russia has hiked its rate. Japan might do, who fucking knows. Yeah, again, if you look at like the markets, they're kind of being less sad. I know that in PYRESWAP, we're actually, September's been a happy month so far, right? September 6th, I believe, was the moment of uptrend. So we don't really necessarily apply to, hi, Robin Goodfellow over there on Kick. How are you? Thank you to everybody attending on here on Kick. Don't forget to like and subscribe or whatever the policy is there. And if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask them in comments. Yes, Jaber, yeah. So our deflationary uptrend continues. Again, like it was all there in the numbers the whole time. I don't know. We have changed our summoning circle. So deflationary uptrend could flatten a little bit. So whatever the slope of it you see, it could cut in half. It could go into a downtrend. Like I don't know yet. We have to test this out. Getting these theoretics and like getting this data is extremely valuable. I know that when it's your own exposure. Right now we are in beta testing, so I want you to understand that being exposed to 5 collecting economic data on a market that you're participating in is probably just the cost of doing business. Yeah, like so if you believe that I've always had the ability to create a deflationary uptrend, which now maybe you see for yourself, obviously there's upside for that in you. Does that make sense? But the cost right now is the fact that PYRESWAP is PYRESWAP is new inventions and figuring out how it works, like truly having this dialed in like a central banker. Yeah, like I am Jerome Powelling PyroGas right now. Do you guys understand? Yeah, like I do, like getting this data is important, if that makes sense. This is a real bank. This is a real bank. Okay, so we talked about the ECB. The summoning circle changed. We have 37 members in our subreddit. The FOMC press conference, ECB. Okay, so first of all, today, fear and greed index for Bitcoin. Would you guys believe, for the first time ever, this is also critical, alternative.me shows a 39 of fear. And CoinMarketCap, believe it or not, I'm going to pull this up on screen share actually. Yeah. If you would, Mr. Producer, shows a 36. Yeah. So first of all, I was of the impression, if you guys remember, why do we collect this data in the first place is to like figure out if our assumptions are correct. Now, I was of the opinion Yes, Alessio. When airdrop? Sunday. Sunday is the airdrop. Okay. So CMC, CMC, which I never thought was going to go like lower than alternative.me. They are in fact showing a higher rate of fear than alternative.me, which I kind of thought, like, you know, if you look at that image though, where the like black dot is, I don't really feel like that's a 36. I mean, it kind of is, but it seems like it's a lot closer to 40 than 36. But the point being there is that I never thought that CMC would go lower. I always thought CMC was trying to like control the narrative. Yeah. Now I get it. Okay, Alessio, from where I'm standing, it's impossible for me to tell the difference between like joke complaints and real complaints. Yeah, it's just like, I'm just so used to that being like the regular opinion, right? Because I don't know if you guys have seen this. If you go and look in the chat, there are people who like, they're just similar to our Reddit strategy. They're motivated to ask questions in chat based on pain. Does that make sense? For those of you who heard me train on this before, they're motivated from like a negative emotion, right? That was like, right? Like it's just pain. So like I don't know like if it's fake pain or real pain, right? Like it's just I think that, you know, joking that you're in pain to somebody else who's in another language, they might think it's real pain. Do you know what I mean? But anyways, speaking of which, as far as the airdrop goes, if you guys did see that number, what was the total airdrop token quantity? Who here remembers? What was the token quantity for Pyre Phantom in the airdrop? Did you guys remember? Pop quiz. 635,000. Yeah, 635,000. So 600,000. Yeah, Jay Reed, close enough. So if you see the total supply right now is what? Is 22 million plus? 22 million? Right? So it's actually like, let's just say 700,000. 700,000 out of 22 million, because 700,000 divides easier as a 3. Yep, so we have 700,000. Goodness gracious, 700,000 divided by 22 million. And this is in fact 3% of the total supply. Does that make sense? Do you guys get it? Yeah, so really, yeah, what it is, it's like, that's like 4 days of emissions today. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Yeah, so arguably, now that I know this number, because I didn't really know this number before, yeah, I would say that it would be very, like, yeah, even if all of it gets sold, I don't really expect it to be a huge interruption to any sort of deflationary uptrend. Does that make sense? I don't expect that on any chain, just because of these numbers. Do you guys understand me? Yeah, like, again, we're talking about 3% of the total supply. Oh, well. Yep, that'll happen in a week, or in 5 or 6 days. Okay, so that's that. Yep, Friday and Sunday cancellations of the PYRESWAP show. That is near official. I'll make an actual announcement about it in Discord. And yeah, I guess, yeah. The rest of the stuff that I had to talk about today are the general powers of the Fed, to help you guys understand that. There's a couple other stuff here on these on this screen share here. Oh, by the way, looks like Pyre Phantom is continuing to climb towards peg. You'll notice that even on TWAP, it is now half of 1. That sure is fast. Goodness gracious, half of 1. Here, let me look at Pyre Phantom. It's now literally half of 1. What did I say it was yesterday? Like 0.003 something? Like it was a third of 1. Now it's half of 1. It's crazy. You know, when you one of the reasons meme coins use these incredibly high total supplies is because it shows that the price of one token can change a lot with a like a smaller amount of money. Does that make sense to you guys? So like when you're even hyperinflated, it's still easier to like make the chart look like you're just mooning. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Okay. We're already half of 1 point. Look at that. Interesting. We better get this marketing going, huh? Goodness gracious, we want these. Hi Winter, how are you? Okay. So we talked about the cancellations. We talked about the JPOW conference. Okay, let's talk about the powers of the Fed. Do you guys want to look at charts anymore? Do you guys want to look at charts? Let's talk about the powers of the Fed. We got 37 members. Don't forget to like and subscribe. The ECB has cut their interest rates to 3.5. Warns of weak Eurozone growth. They're trying to cut rates because they think that the Eurozone might falter, or should I say, like, stall. Yeah, slow. Anyways, there's another thing here about the Russia interest rate, and they showed like where it was in 2022. So they had like a 20% interest rate here, then they cut all the way down to 7.5%. And you can see here, Russia, just over the last 2 years, they have been much more aggressive in their changes of interest rate. Do you guys see that here? Yes, can you guys see my screen? Yep. Okay. There's also the CBR key rate, and they show the history here in a this is actually the same thing, isn't it? But right here, you can actually look on this website, globalrates.com, and you can see all the interest rates. Did you guys know this? This is a website. You can see the American Central Bank. The United States is a 5.5 apparently. This was as of July. The Australian Central Bank is here. Brazilian, British, Canada, Chile, Chinese, Czech, Danish, right? So you can look down here and see the Mexican Central Bank. You can see Russia right here. There you go. Turkish Central Bank. Turkish Central Bank is up to 50%. And the last time, let's see what this was. Previous was 45. So Turkish Central Bank, in order to deal with their inflation, their rate is fucking 50%. And these are these central bank interest rates. They're not necessarily handled. These configurations are not the same way. Like, they're not necessarily done the same way. So all these banks, they have like different mechanisms that kind of determine inflation and deflation. Just like PYRESWAP, by the way. Just like PYRESWAP. Does that make sense? Like, so when I talk about we're adjusting the summoning circle, or when we're adjusting the expansion rate of the fucking Genesis, right? These are literally, I'm doing the same job as Jerome Powell. Does that make sense to you guys? Right? And I'm going to talk about what that actually looks like. We got crypto dashboard. Okay, fear and greed, fear and greed. And again, if nobody else has any questions, we can in fact talk about the Federal Reserve System. I'm just going to go over the three powers. Okay, the three powers of the Federal Reserve, and different central banks have different powers, but this is basically the three things the Federal Reserve can do to affect the instrument. Okay, the dollar, as it were. All right. So on screen share here. Read these sections to learn about the Federal Reserve System structures, functions, and goals. Also identify and explain. Look at that, they give you fucking objectives. Okay. These are what the key takeaways. Okay, well, this is that. Okay, let's actually not do this. Let's go back. Okay, powers of the Fed. The Fed's principal powers stem from its authority to conduct monetary policy. Conduct monetary policy. It has three main policy tools: setting reserve requirements, operating the discount window and other credit facilities, and conducting open market operations. And these are effectively called, reserve rate. And then arguably, I think the fucking interest rate, I think that's the way you would describe it. OMO is open market operation. And here they talk about like operating the discount window. Yeah, we'll just say discount. Discount rate, okay? Now, sometimes they refer to discount rate as interest rate. And I'm gonna explain like how these three things fucking work effectively. So the Fed, the reserve requirements. The Fed says the required ratio of reserves that banks must hold relative to their deposit liabilities. Okay? We're going to fucking deconstruct that message. The required ratio of reserves that banks must hold relative to their deposit liabilities. Do you guys know what deposit liabilities are? It means all the money that they have in that bank, like that is held there from people who need banks. Does that make sense? So understand that like when banks are holding capital, like your cash, that is a deposit liability, meaning they are liable to give you that money back, the depositor. Do you guys understand? So the reserve ratio, they're setting a required ratio of reserves. And most of the time, this reserve requirement is that 3%. Does that make sense? So if they set a reserve ratio of a reserve rate of 1%, banks must keep 1% of their bag with the Fed. Does that make sense? So the way that the Fed works is the Fed is like a mandating bank that literally says like, hey, you have to deposit more with me now. Does that make sense? And it literally just bosses these other banks around by creating this rate that they have to kind of maintain, or they get fined for it. Does that make sense to you guys? Right? So if a bank has like $100 billion in, believe it or not, this is actually like multiple tiers away. So it's not even like you're dealing with a branch bank here, but I'm not going to get into the fucking, honestly, this should be a diagram of the relationship, which I don't think the internet has. I might build that diagram later for my own fucking economics course, but more on that later. Okay. It could lower reserve requirements when it wanted to increase the money supply. Does that make sense? It lowers the requirements when it wants to increase the money supply. Meaning, if it wants to take this 1% and make it 0.5%, what that means is it allows the banks to have more money. Does that make sense? Right? So if it goes from 1% to 0.5%, you might be thinking, oh, but that's only 0.5% more, right? Like it's like, oh, well, if they're offering like $100 billion there, and they're holding $1 billion at 1%, that only frees up $500 million when they go from 1% to 0.5, right? That only frees up $500 million, right? Right? Do you guys understand what I just said, or am I speaking too fast? If we were to cut this rate from 1% to 0.5, and the bank has $100 billion in deposit liabilities, yeah, more money to lend out. However, Pega's correct. It's not 500 million. The bank uses fractional reserve lending on that 500 million. So the bank is able to turn that 500 million into like another 5 billion or 50 billion of fucking loans. Does that make sense? Because they're using the time value of money to just balance the rates. Does that make sense? Kind of the same thing we're doing with PYRESWAP right now. Does that make sense? The time value of money. Okay? So if it wanted to increase the money supply, it would lower its rates. So right now, Jerome Powell on Wednesday, he might lower rates. What this will do is increase the money supply, which means that it does lubricate the whole economy by making things more transactable, because banks now have more money to make loans and stuff like that. But it also, because it makes the dollar more plentiful, also in theory could inflate it. Does that make sense? So that is where this decision comes from. It can reduce the money supply when it hikes rates. So since over the last 2 years, we've been hiking rates to reduce the money supply. Now, in practice, the Fed does not use its power to set reserve requirements. The reason is that frequent manipulation of reserve requirements would make life difficult for bankers who would have to adjust their lending policies to changing requirements. The Fed's power to set reserve requirements was expanded by the Monetary Control Act of 1980. I should actually mention this. Before that, the Fed set reserve requirements only for commercial banks that were members of the Fed Reserve System. Most banks are not members of the Fed. The Fed's control of reserve requirements thus extends only to a minority of banks. But the 1980 Act required virtually all banks to satisfy the Fed's reserve requirements. Make sense? This deserves to be a diagram, because there's also like regional branches of the Fed and stuff. Anyways, okay. So most of the time, they're not really dabbling the reserve rate. They actually control the interest rate, right? So right here, the discount window and other credit facilities. A major responsibility of the Fed is to act as a lender of last resort. So when banks fall short on reserves, they can borrow reserves from the Fed through its discount window. I want you guys to understand this right here. Reserve rate, OMOs, and discount rate. So when banks fall short on reserves, they can borrow from the Fed through its discount window. This is very fucking weird, okay? I want you to understand this. The Fed sets something called the reserve rate and says, hey, all banks need to maintain a certain amount of money here at the Fed by mandate. Now, what happens if a bank is unable to meet that requirement? The Fed is like, okay, we're going to lend you the money to meet that requirement. Do you guys understand? Do you guys understand? This is the rate, by the way. This is the rate that Jerome Powell is adjusting. This 3.6, this 3.7, this 5%. He's adjusting the rate that the Fed charges to commercial banks. Yeah. Do you guys understand? He's charging like the interest rate that they charge for just banking there. I'm not going to comment on some of the stuff I'm saying in chat, but you guys can fucking figure it out. Literally, it's like, hey, we have a reserve requirement and you have to meet it. But it's like, what if we can't meet it? Okay, we can lend you the money to meet it, but you have to pay interest on that money. Does that make sense? So literally, like, these banks like don't even meet the reserve requirement, but they end up just borrowing money at an extremely low rate, by the way, from the Federal Reserve. Does that make sense? But because they're leveraging, like, again, these are extremely, like, in theory, easy. Like, well, actually, the rates are, never mind. But the point being here is that, like, okay, well, we can, in fact, lend you the money to meet the reserve requirement. And that's called the discount window, which is the interest rate. So when we talk about the Fed's interest rate or its discount rate or its discount window, you're talking about the Fed lending money to banks so that they can be compliant with the Fed. Does that make sense? Well, Pega, no. But the fact of the matter is the Fed will increase its interest rate. Does that make sense? That's what it does. So like the Fed will raise its interest rate in order to not run out. Does that make sense? Like that's literally what's getting managed. Yeah. Yeah, and like again, this is dollars on paper. Does that make sense? So when they talk about printing money, they don't actually print money, right? The mint does that. The actual money, the money minting thing that prints the banknotes, that is done at the mint. What the Fed does, it just creates dollars on paper that banks can kind of trade in an aftermarket for each other. Does everyone understand? Okay, back to the screen. Okay, the discount rate is the interest rate charged by the Fed when it lends reserves to banks. The Board of Governors sets the discount rate. So lowering the discount rate makes funds cheaper to banks. A lower discount rate could place downward pressure on interest rates in the economy. Does that make sense? However, when financial markets are operating normally, banks rarely borrow from the Fed, reserving use of the discount window for emergencies. Does that make sense? Right. So a typical bank borrows from the Fed only about once or twice per year. Make sense? This is actually great. I've never read this before. Instead of borrowing from the Fed when they need reserves, banks typically rely on the federal funds market to obtain reserves. The federal funds market is a market in which banks lend reserves to one another. Does that make sense? So instead of dealing with this interest rate that the Fed lends to that, the banks create an aftermarket where they're all undercutting the interest rate. Does that make sense? So banks end up circularly, if you will, lending to each other to help each other avoid the federal discount rate. Does that make sense? By the way, like the modern banking is such a CJ, modern banking is such a fucking like abomination of like the abuse between private and public and things like that. And yeah, Pega, I need to make this a diagram, which literally nobody has ever done on the internet before. But like I would literally explain like, you know, like that, like this is kind of why like I need to be this fucking professor, as it were. Like literally this is not on the internet where it's like you can see the diagram of who's doing what, right? And like actually add names to these actors, right? Like who, like are we talking about Are we talking about a regional Fed bank, or are we talking about fucking Chase Bank and Wells Fargo? Are we talking about Bank of America? Or are we talking about, Yeah, Pega, I agree. By the way, this is some of the stuff that I was researching when I designed other things in DeFi. So I want you guys to understand that, like, the GPSC has the ability to be complex because we understand we're a fucking bank in the first place. So the Federal Reserve is arguably a simple fucking bank, right? There's only 3 things it does. But the we can do much more creative stuff. Anyways, so the federal funds rate is the interest rate charged for those loans. Okay, so it is determined by banks' demand for and supply of these reserves. The ability to set the discount rate is no longer an important tool. Okay, to deal with the recent financial and economic conditions, the Fed greatly expanded its lending beyond traditional discount window lending. As falling house prices led to foreclosures, private investment banks, and other not financial institutions, the Fed made credit available to a wide range of institutions in an effort to stem the crisis. Okay. So by the way, like literally the Fed has kind of shifted its policy just in the last 15 years. Like it's always like, should we do this now? Like it's ridiculous. And by the way, this is all just weird stuff the Fed has done, like in the departure since the suspension of Bretton Woods. Like it just gets more and more convoluted. As falling house prices led to foreclosures, private investment banks, and other financial institutions came under increasing pressure, the Fed made credit available to a wide range of institutions in an effort to stem the crisis. In 2008, the Fed bailed out 2 major housing firms that had been established by the government to prop up the housing industry: Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Again, the 2 institutions backed the mortgages of half the nation's mortgage loans. It also agreed to provide $85 billion to AIG, the huge insurance firm. AIG had a subsidiary that was heavily exposed to mortgage losses, and that crippled the firm. The Fed determined that AIG was simply too big to be allowed to fail. Many banks had ties to the giant, and failure would have been a blow to these banks. So literally, like the Fed creates this system where all the banks end up like enmeshed with each other, and they can't insulate from each other. And then literally, it's like, okay, well now that we have this fucking cancer, this systemic cancer that's rotting the whole fucking system, I guess we have to step in again to fix the system because in theory we're the actual root of the problem. Does that make sense to you guys? Like this is what a lot of people don't understand about like the banking system, right? Like everyone's like, the banks were behind it. It's like, well, again, literally like Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were literally like these corporations and associations propped up to be subsidiaries of the government, and then the government's bailing out itself because it has no reason to be good at banking. Do you guys get what I'm saying? Like, so the private banks are lending or like leaning on the fucking guarantee that these fucking public banks will never collapse, and then therefore they're just able to kind of like, do you get what I'm saying? They have one foot in both. They have 1 foot in both boats. Do you guys get what I'm saying? It's like, well, I can always just shift back over here because the government is not going to let itself collapse. Yeah. Anyways, this is, if you want to really understand like why Web3 and Bitcoin and stuff like this is like a critic or like possibly has the potential to eliminate systems like this, you have to understand what the system is in the first place. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. In 2008, the Fed bailed out, blah, 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 blah. Okay. AIG had a subsidiary that was heavily exposed, blah, blah, blah. Okay. As the United States faced the worst crisis since the Great Depression, the Fed took center stage. Whatever its role in the crisis of 07-08, the Fed remains an important backstop for banks and other financial institutions needing liquidity. And for that, it uses the traditional discount window, supplemented with a wide range of other credit facilities. Pega, I can if you want. The case in point of this section discusses these new credit facilities. I'm going to talk about OMOs first, open market operations. And actually, Pega, like I will. We're right here on the hour, so I will do that tomorrow. Yeah, if you want to ask me that question tomorrow or another day, that would be great. So the Fed's ability to buy and sell federal government bonds. Okay. The Fed trades bonds. Has proved to be its most potent policy tool. A bond is a promise by the issuer of the bond, in this case the federal government, meaning it's literally trading treasury bonds to pay the owner of the bond a payment. So the buying and selling of bonds by the Fed are called open market operations. When the Fed buys or sells government bonds, it adds or subtracts reserves from the banking system. Such changes affect the money supply. Suppose the Fed buys a government bond in the open market. It writes a check on its own account to the seller of the bond, which, by the way, is the treasury. Okay? When the seller deposits the check at a bank, the bank submits the check to the Fed for payment. Does that make sense? Okay, let's start it again. It writes a check on its own account to the seller of the bond, right? When the seller deposits the check, the bank submits the check to the Fed for payment. The Fed pays the check by crediting the bank's account at the Fed, so the bank has more reserves. Do you guys understand that? Now, it buys these treasury bonds, but it can also buy them from private banks. Does that make sense? It doesn't need to buy them only from the treasury. Does that make sense? Right? Rather, it's there to like rescue the fucking bondholders. Does that make sense? Let's like, hey, the Federal Reserve has to have the lowest possible time preference so it has the greatest possible patience. Therefore, it's able to Fed buys bonds from private banks. So literally, it issues a check to this. Does that make sense? When it buys that bond, the bank submits the check to the Fed for payment. Right? Now, let me actually diagram this. To the seller of the bond. When the seller deposits the check at a bank, then this is fucking crazy. Okay. Let's draw a diagram. Fed bond holder fucking bank. Okay, so the Fed is buying a bond from this bond holder. Does that make sense? The bond holder takes the check, yeah. Literally like, yeah, cashes check, right? Sorry, deposits. There you go. We'll say fucking deposits. Right? Deposit the check. The bank submits the check, right? Submits the check with the Fed. When the Fed pays the check by crediting the bank's account, right? Right? It literally credits the bank's account here. Does that make sense? So it's like, hey, like the bondholder, as it were, like you can in fact just convert bonds back into reserves. Does that make sense? The Fed's purchase of a bond can be illustrated using a balance sheet. And I'm not going to actually get into this fucking thing. This is fucking crazy. Yeah. Does that make sense? I could definitely spend a lot more time. Oh, here you go. Here's diagrams. Okay. Anyways, I can continue going over this stuff. I might just do that like over this week. All right. Anyways, yeah, do you guys have any questions? Thank you so much, everybody, for on Twitter and Kick and stuff like that. And thanks so much to everybody in Discord. And yeah, if nobody has any more questions, I want to thank you guys for coming to the PYRESWAP Show Market Monday. And we'll see you guys tomorrow. I'll be making an announcement later about canceling Sunday and Friday and some other stuff. And have a great rest of your day.